The creatures surged through the hidden doorway, their ghostly moans filling the cavernous space. Emily braced herself, her fingers tightening around the cold steel of the crowbar. "Spread out and flank them," Jack yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We can't let them overrun us." The other survivors snapped into action, grabbing makeshift weapons and positioning themselves around the room. Emily followed Jack's lead, circling around to the left while the others moved to the right. As the first of the creatures reached them, Emily swung her crowbar with all her might, the metal crashing against the creature's skull with a sickening crunch. The zombie crumpled to the ground, but more were already pushing through the doorway. The air was thick with the stench of rot and the sound of desperate, frantic fighting. Emily watched in horror as one of the survivors was dragged down, his anguished cries cutting through the din. "We can't hold them off," a woman yelled, her voice laced with panic. Jack gritted his teeth, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the situation. "We need to fall back. Everyone, follow me." He turned and dashed toward the far corner of the room, the other survivors close on his heels. Emily hesitated for a moment, catching a glimpse of the creatures tearing into the fallen survivor, before she whirled around and ran after the group. As they reached the corner, Jack pushed aside a tattered curtain to reveal another hidden doorway. "This way, hurry." The survivors piled through the doorway, their footsteps echoing as they descended a set of narrow stairs. Emily could hear the creatures behind them, their guttural moans growing louder. They emerged into a dimly lit tunnel, the air thick with the stench of mold and decay. Jack led them down the winding passageway, his pace quickening as the sounds of the creatures grew closer. "Where does this lead?" Emily asked, her voice shaky. "An old subway station," Jack replied, his eyes darting back and forth. "It's our best chance of losing them." They pressed on, the tunnel growing darker and more claustrophobic. Emily could feel the panic rising within her, the realization that they were trapped like rats in this underground labyrinth. Suddenly, a sickening crunch echoed through the tunnel, and one of the survivors let out a horrified scream. Emily whirled around, her heart pounding, to see a creature emerging from the shadows, its jaws clamped around the survivor's arm. "No," Emily cried, her crowbar raised high, ready to strike. But before she could act, the tunnel was plunged into total darkness, and the sounds of the creatures grew deafening, surrounding them on all sides. They thought the cure worked. Now more zombies. The creatures surged through the hidden doorway, their ghostly moans filling the cavernous space. Emily braced herself, her fingers tightening around the cold steel of the crowbar. "Spread out and flank them," Jack yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We can't let them overrun us." The other survivors snapped into action, grabbing makeshift weapons and positioning themselves around the room. Emily followed Jack's lead, circling around to the left while the others moved to the right. As the first of the creatures reached them, Emily swung her crowbar with all her might, the metal crashing against the creature's skull with a sickening crunch. The zombie crumpled to the ground, but more were already pushing through the doorway. The air was thick with the stench of rot and the sound of desperate, frantic fighting. Emily watched in horror as one of the survivors was dragged down, his anguished cries cutting through the din. "We can't hold them off," a woman yelled, her voice laced with panic. Jack gritted his teeth, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the situation. "We need to fall back. Everyone, follow me." He turned and dashed toward the far corner of the room, the other survivors close on his heels. Emily hesitated for a moment, catching a glimpse of the creatures tearing into the fallen survivor, before she whirled around and ran after the group. As they reached the corner, Jack pushed aside a tattered curtain to reveal another hidden doorway. "This way, hurry." The survivors piled through the doorway, their footsteps echoing as they descended a set of narrow stairs. Emily could hear the creatures behind them, their guttural moans growing louder. They emerged into a dimly lit tunnel, the air thick with the stench of mold and decay. Jack led them down the winding passageway, his pace quickening as the sounds of the creatures grew closer. "Where does this lead?" Emily asked, her voice shaky. "An old subway station," Jack replied, his eyes darting back and forth. "It's our best chance of losing them." They pressed on, the tunnel growing darker and more claustrophobic. Emily could feel the panic rising within her, the realization that they were trapped like rats in this underground labyrinth. Suddenly, a sickening crunch echoed through the tunnel, and one of the survivors let out a horrified scream. Emily whirled around, her heart pounding, to see a creature emerging from the shadows, its jaws clamped around the survivor's arm. "No!" Emily cried, her crowbar raised high, ready to strike. But before she could act, the tunnel was plunged into total darkness, and the sounds of the creatures were deafening, surrounding them on all sides. Asterisk, they thought the cure worked. Now more zombies asterisk. Darkness enveloped the survivors as they scrambled through the claustrophobic tunnel, the echoes of the creatures' snarls and groans closing in around them. Emily's heart raced, her grip tightening on the crowbar as she stumbled along, desperate to keep up with the group. "Keep moving." Jack's voice rang out, his tone laced with urgency. "We're almost there." The air grew thick with the stench of decay, and Emily could feel the presence of the creatures pressing in from all sides. The sound of their shuffling footsteps and the occasional snapping of jaws sent chills down her spine. Suddenly, a weak cry pierced the darkness, followed by the agonizing sound of flesh being torn. Emily's stomach turned, and she fought the urge to scream, knowing that any noise could draw the creature's attention. "Don't stop," Jack shouted, his voice strained. "We can't help them now." Emily gritted her teeth, forcing herself to keep moving, her body trembling with a mix of fear and adrenaline. The tunnel seemed to stretch on endlessly, and with each step, she could feel the creatures closing in, their rancid breath hot on the back of her neck. Just when she thought she couldn't go any further, a flickering light appeared in the distance, and the sound of a heavy metal door creaking open echoed through the tunnel. "This way," Jack called out, ushering the survivors through the doorway. Emily stumbled through the opening, her eyes squinting against the sudden brightness. They had emerged into a large, abandoned subway station, the scattered light of emergency lanterns casting long shadows across the crumbling tiles. "We should be safe here for now," Jack said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "But we need to find a way to seal off the tunnel." The other survivors, their faces etched with fear and desperation, began to gather what they could find to barricade the entrance. Emily watched, her mind racing, as they shoved benches and debris against the doorway, trying to create a makeshift barrier. "What happened back there?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack's expression darkened, and he shook his head. "We lost one of the others. I'm sorry, but we couldn't afford to stop and help." Emily felt a pang of guilt and sorrow, knowing that the decision must have been agonizing. But she also understood the harsh reality of their situation. They were fighting for their own survival, and sometimes hard choices had to be made. As the survivors continued to work, Emily surveyed their new surroundings, her eyes narrowing as she noticed something in the distance. Slowly, she made her way towards the far end of the station, her crowbar at the ready. Asterisk, they thought the cure worked. Now more zombies asterisk. Emily's footsteps echoed across the cavernous subway station as she made her way towards the distant end of the platform. The flickering emergency lights cast long, eerie shadows, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. As she drew closer, she could make out a figure hunched against the wall, its movements slow and jerky. Her grip tightened on the crowbar, her heart pounding in her chest. "Hello," she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. The figure stirred, turning its head towards her. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she took in the creature's appearance. Its skin was a sickly, mottled gray, and its eyes were sunken and lifeless. Asterisk, another one of them asterisk. Without hesitation, Emily raised the crowbar, prepared to strike. But as she moved closer, She realized that the creature was not advancing towards her. Instead, it seemed to be guarding something. Curiosity overriding her fear, Emily inched closer, her eyes narrowing as she caught sight of a small, huddled form behind the creature. A child. The creature let out a low, guttural growl, its eyes fixed on Emily, warning her to stay back. Emily froze, her mind racing. Could this thing be protecting the child? Jack, she called out, her voice barely above a whisper. Come here, quickly. The sound of footsteps behind her told her that Jack had heard her call. He appeared at her side, his eyes widening as he took in the scene. What is this? He murmured, his hand gripping a makeshift weapon. I think it's protecting the child, Emily replied, her voice uncertain. Jack's brow furrowed, and he took a step forward, his weapon raised. The creature let out a threatening snarl, its body tensing. Wait, Emily said, placing a hand on Jack's arm. I don't think it means us any harm. Jack hesitated, his eyes darting between the creature and the child. We can't take any chances, he said, his voice low and grim. Emily opened her mouth to protest, but before she could, a thunderous crash echoed from the direction they had come. The creatures had breached the makeshift barricade. We've got company, Jack said, his eyes hardening. We need to get that child to safety. He turned and hurried back towards the group, leaving Emily alone with the strange, protective creature. She glanced back at the child, her heart aching with a mixture of fear and compassion. Asterisk, they thought the cure worked. Now more zombies asterisk. Emily's mind raced as she stood frozen, her eyes locked with the creatures. The thunderous sounds of the approaching horde echoed through the cavernous subway station, but she couldn't bring herself to leave the child behind. Suddenly, the creature let out a low, guttural growl, its body tensing as it shifted its position to better shield the child. Emily's grip tightened on the crowbar, but she hesitated, a glimmer of understanding flickering in her mind. I won't hurt you, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the din. Or the child. The creature's eyes narrowed, its gaze piercing, as if it were trying to discern the truth in her words. Emily held its stare, her heart pounding, and slowly, she lowered the crowbar to her side. A sudden, crashing sound from the direction of the barricade snapped Emily back to the dire situation at hand. She turned and sprinted towards the group, her mind whirling with the implications of what she had just witnessed. They're breaking through. One of the survivors shouted as Emily reached them. We need to find another way out of here. Jack's face was etched with grim determination. This way, he said, motioning towards a darkened stairwell. It leads to the surface, but we'll have to move fast. The group surged forward, their footsteps echoing through the stairwell as they climbed, the sounds of the creatures growing closer with each step. Emily's lungs burned, but she refused to slow down, driven by a newfound sense of purpose. As they emerged onto the street, the night air hit Emily's face, and she took a moment to survey their surroundings. The city had become a war zone, with abandoned cars and debris littering the streets, and the distant sounds of chaos and screaming filling the air. We need to find shelter, Jack said, his eyes darting back and forth. Somewhere secure, where we can regroup and plan our next move. The survivors huddled together, their faces tense with fear and uncertainty. Emily's thoughts, however, were elsewhere, consumed by the image of the protective creature and the child it had guarded. Asterisk, they thought the cure worked. Now more zombies asterisk. The group moved swiftly through the abandoned streets, their footsteps echoing against the crumbling buildings. Emily's mind raced, the image of the protective creature and the child seared into her memory. There, Jack said, pointing towards a towering office building, its windows dark and its doors ajar. That might work as a temporary refuge. The survivors hurried towards the building, their weapons at the ready. As they reached the entrance, Jack paused, his brow furrowed. We need to be careful, he said, his voice low. Who knows what might be lurking inside? One by one, the group filed into the lobby, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. Emily followed closely, her grip tightening on the crowbar as she listened for any telltale sounds of the creatures. Suddenly, a faint whimper reached her ears, coming from a darkened corner of the lobby. Emily's heart skipped a beat, and she turned towards the sound, her eyes narrowing. "Wait," she said, holding up a hand to stop the group. "I think I heard something." Cautiously, she made her way towards the corner, her footsteps muffled by the debris scattered across the floor. As she drew closer, she could make out the shape of a small, huddled figure, its body trembling. "Hello," she called out, her voice soft and gentle. "It's okay, we're here to help." The figure stirred, and Emily's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the child from the subway station. The creature was nowhere to be seen, and the child was alone, its eyes wide with fear. "It's all right," Emily said, crouching down to the child's level. "We're not going to hurt you." The child stared at her, its lips trembling, and Emily felt a surge of protectiveness wash over her. Carefully, she reached out a hand, offering it to the child. "Come with us," she said, her voice low and soothing. "We'll keep you safe." The child hesitated for a moment, its eyes darting between Emily and the rest of the group. Then, slowly, it reached out and took Emily's hand, its grip surprisingly strong. Emily stood, the child clutching her tightly, and turned to face the others. Jack's expression was unreadable, but the rest of the survivors looked on with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. "We can't just leave him here," Emily said, her voice firm. Jack nodded, his expression softening. "All right, let's get him somewhere secure." As the group moved deeper into the building, Emily couldn't help but wonder about the creature and its mysterious bond with the child. What had happened to it, and where had it gone? Asterisk, they thought the cure worked. Now more zombies asterisk. The group made their way through the darkened office building, their footsteps echoing through the silent corridors. The child clung to Emily, its small fingers gripping her sleeve with a surprising strength. "Over here," Jack called out, motioning towards a set of heavy, wooden doors. "This looks like it might be a secure area." The survivors hurried towards the doors, their weapons at the ready. Jack carefully pushed one of the doors open, peering inside. "Looks clear," he said, nodding to the others. "Let's move in." The group filed into the room, which appeared to be some kind of executive office. The walls were lined with bookshelves and ornate furniture, and a large mahogany desk dominated the center of the space. "All right, let's barricade the doors and see what we can find," Jack said, already moving to push a heavy cabinet in front of the entrance. As the others set to work, Emily gently led the child to a plush armchair, helping them to sit down. "You'll be safe here," she said, her voice low and soothing. "We're going to keep you protected." The child stared up at her, its eyes wide and wary. Emily couldn't help but wonder what horrors it had witnessed, what traumas it had endured. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of the creatures. The survivors froze, their bodies tensing as they readied their weapons. "They're coming," Jack said, his voice tense. "Everyone, get ready." Emily's heart pounded in her chest as she gripped the crowbar, her eyes scanning the darkened room for any sign of the creatures. The sound of their moans and snarls grew louder, and she could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Just as the first of the creatures appeared in the doorway, a flash of movement caught Emily's eye. She whirled around, her breath catching in her throat as she recognized the familiar, hulking figure of the protective creature from the subway station. It let out a deep, guttural growl, its eyes fixed on the approaching horde. Without hesitation, it surged forward, its massive claws slashing and tearing at the creatures with a ferocity that stunned Emily. The other survivors watched in stunned silence as the creature fought, its movements swift and brutal. Emily felt a surge of hope and wonder, realizing that this creature was not like the others. it was protecting them, just as it had protected the child. As the last of the creatures fell, the creature turned its gaze towards Emily, its eyes reflecting a strange intelligence. Emily felt a connection, a sense of understanding, and she knew that this creature was not their enemy. Asterisk, they thought the cure worked. Now more zombies asterisk. The creature's gaze held Emily's for a moment, its eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that she couldn't quite comprehend. Then, with a low rumble, it turned and lumbered back towards the child, who had watched the entire encounter with wide, awestruck eyes. The other survivors seemed unsure of how to react, their weapons still raised and their faces etched with a mixture of fear and confusion. What the hell was that? One of them whispered, his voice trembling. Jack stepped forward, his expression grave. I don't know, but it just saved our lives. For now, we should focus on securing this place and seeing if we can find any supplies. The group began to move, their footsteps slow and cautious, as they spread out to search the office. Emily, however, remained where she was, her eyes fixed on the creature as it gently approached the child, its movements almost protective. Slowly, the child reached out a small hand, tentatively touching the creature's massive arm. To Emily's amazement, the creature seemed to respond, its body language softening as it lowered its head, almost as if it were comforting the child. How is this possible? Emily murmured, her mind racing with questions. Was this creature somehow different from the others, a mutated form of the infection that had ravaged the city? Or was it something else entirely, a guardian sent to protect the innocent in the midst of this apocalyptic nightmare? As she watched the creature and the child, Emily felt a glimmer of hope, a spark of light in the darkness that surrounded them. Perhaps, amidst the chaos and the horror, there was still the possibility of redemption, of finding a way to survive and rebuild. Emily. Come on, we need to get these doors barricaded, Jack called out, his voice cutting through the silence. With one last glance at the creature, Emily turned and joined the others, her determination renewed. They would find a way to survive, to fight back against the horrors that had consumed their world. And perhaps, with the help of this mysterious, protective creature, they might even find a way to reclaim their humanity and their hope. Asterisk, they thought the cure worked. Now more zombies asterisk.